Hello, I'm Tim Smith with the Adams County Historical Society, and welcome to another Monuments Monday. So you might remember a few weeks ago, we asked if anybody out there had any questions about monuments, markers, or tablets associated with the Battle of Gettysburg that we might answer. And we asked for the questions to be placed in the comments. And we got a number of really good questions. So I thought we'd ask some of the questions from our viewers and give my response. I did print the questions out, and then I spent a few minutes researching some of the questions. Just instead of giving answers off the top of my head, I thought it would be more interesting, so I have some notes here. The first question is by top fan Brian Smith, and he asks, how many different animals are on the monuments? And I thought that was a really good question. And it's interesting that Brian Smith is a top fan. He's also my brother. My brother usually doesn't interact with the site like this, so I thought that was nice. Also, my sister-in-law, the wife of another of my brothers, asked a follow-up question. Are there any cats on monuments? So let me answer that one first. One of the animals that appears on the monument is a wild cat, and it's on the front of the 105th Pennsylvania Regimental Monument. Of course, when we talk about animals on monuments, there are horses everywhere. You know, there are equestrian statues, and of course there are cavalry units that feature horses like the 6th New York Cavalry or the 8th New York or the 9th New York or the 10th New York Cavalries come to mind. They all have horses on there, or the 8th Pennsylvania Infantry features a horse. And, you know, I'd imagine that depending on where you look, there might be some mules on monuments as well, so different kinds of horses. There's also eagles on a lot of the monuments. So there's an eagle on top of the 9th New York State Militia Monument, which is the 83rd New York, you probably know. There's a huge eagle featured on the New York Auxiliary Monument, for instance. Now, other birds beside eagles, of course, you may know there's a bird's nest on the 90th Pennsylvania Monument. And most people have suggested that it's a robin, but a few insisted it's actually a dove. There is a dove on the Louisiana State Memorial, and there's a rooster on the 7th Ohio Monument, and it's actually the badge of the 7th Ohio. There are dogs on monuments. There's, of course, an Irish wolfhound on the Irish Brigade Memorial. And on the 11th Pennsylvania, we have Sally the war dog. Apparently, Sally was a brindle bull terrier of fine breed, according to the colonel of the regiment, who showed marks of blood. Her actual breed was an American pit bull, according to many. There's an owl on the 5th Ohio Monument, and there's an owl on the rock, it's like the badge of the 5th Ohio, on the rock behind it. Of course, there's a lion on the brigade for Grant's Vermont Brigade on the backside of Big Round Top. And, you know, there's a lion hidden in the rocks of the 78th 102nd New York Monument. Ones that people who are into this might not have considered. There's a hornet's nest on the 1st Vermont sharpshooters. And I know when we say animal now, we're talking about the animal kingdom as opposed to, you know, maybe specific as an insect. And then, you know, one thing I always point out to people when we talk about animals on monuments, there are state seals on most of the monuments, and these state seals often feature animals. For instance, there's a buffalo on the Indiana state seal, and you can see a good example of that on the 7th Indiana Memorial on Culp's Hill. There's a badger on the Wisconsin state seal, and you can see that on the 7th Wisconsin Infantry Monument. There's a cow on the Vermont state seal, and you can see that on the Vermont monument along Hancock Avenue. There's an ox on the Delaware state seal, and you can see that on the back of the Delaware State Monument near the old Cyclorama parking lot. There is a moose and an elk on the Michigan state seal, and you can see that on the Michigan monuments. There's a moose on the Maine state seal, and you can see that moose on the monument to the 16th Maine Infantry in its seal. So I bet some of you hadn't thought of that. Sculptor Ron Tunison actually enjoyed placing little, like I guess you would call them Easter eggs on, his monument. And on the statue to Elizabeth Thorne in the Evergreen Cemetery, there's a stag beetle at the bottom of the monument. And on the Friend to Friend Masonic Memorial that he did in the annex of the Soldiers National Cemetery, there's a butterfly on the monument. Now, a couple other things. You probably know there's a pelican on the Louisiana state seal, and the soldiers from Louisiana wore a belt buckle with a pelican on it. But the pelican is not shown on any of the monuments, markers, and tablets on the Gettysburg battlefield. I think they missed their mark. They could have done that. And I like to point out that the 1st Minnesota, of course, the monument features the soldier running towards the Wilcox's brigade to drive them back. The original design of the monument, though, had a soldier in the 1st Minnesota bayoneting a large serpent that was coiling around its leg. I guess that was rejected because it seemed a little much. So what do you think? Are there other animals that are shown on monuments at Gettysburg that I didn't discuss? We'd like to see that in the comments if you have any suggestions. Our next question is by top fan Roseanne, I think she pronounces her name Zyko. She says, they aren't really monuments, but can you explain how some houses that aren't really dated from the battle have a Civil War home plaque? And what is the process for getting a plaque? I think I'm planning on doing a video in more detail about the houses in the town that are marked by markers and tablets. And the Civil War Roundtable, the Gettysburg Civil War Roundtable, initiated the Gettysburg Civil War building plaques. And I got to tell you, it is one of my favorite things about Gettysburg, that you walk along, and visitors love it, and you see historic homes, and on them there is a plaque that says Civil War Building, July 1863. And I guess the idea was conceived around the centennial of the Civil War. The first Civil War building plaque was placed in February of 1966 on a building by the Gettysburg Civil War Roundtable, and it was on the Jeremiah Culp house on the second block of York Street, what we call the Battle Baby house, because a child was born there on July 4th, 1863. And we have much of the correspondence pertaining to the Civil War Plaque Building Committee by the Civil War Roundtable. Harlan Stort was the chairman of the committee originally. And reading his correspondence, it looks like to me that he intended to have a strong set of requirements in the beginning. But very quickly, that process really kind of fell apart. And I got to tell you, researching the construction date of a house is one of the more difficult aspects of historical society research that I know of. So early on, they wanted to, the Civil War Roundtable purchased a bunch of the plaques, and they wanted to issue them to people in the town that had Civil War buildings, and they basically had the person fill out an application, and then they went out and put the Civil War plaque on their building, and you paid the fee. And I think maybe first, early on, the important thing was for people to pay the fee to, so the Roundtable can be reimbursed for all the money they spent in purchasing the plaques. And many people had plaques put on their building without documentation of any kind. And I think Roseanne's probably asking this question because there's a house on Middle Street that was built in the 1920s that has a Civil War plaque on it. And there's a house on West High Street that is obviously an early 1900s house, and it has a plaque on it. Now, there's some houses that were built right after the battle, like in 1867, 1868, that has Civil War plaques on them. And I can absolutely understand how the people could have been confused about the date of construction. We, at the Adams County Historical Society, were fortunate enough to be the recipient of a gift from the Civil War Roundtable, and we have the Civil War plaque application forms. So we have the application form for every building in town and the rest of the county that has a Civil War building plaque on it, and you can come here and at least you can see what the person wrote on their form. But oftentimes, the documentation for whether the building is a Civil War building or not is lacking. Now, most of the Civil War plaques are on buildings that were here at the time. There are somewhere around 200 buildings in the town that have Civil War building plaques on them, and there's another 200 scattered around the county. In the 1990s, I was fortunate to work with a guy named Gerald Bennett, and he had taken over the Civil War plaque application process, and I got to tell you, he was a stickler. And he did extensive research on the houses when people applied for the Civil War building plaques. You can still apply for a Civil War building plaque today. Now, I don't know the process you have to go through. Again, you have to contact the Gettysburg Civil War Roundtable. But they are very diligent today in making sure that the building was actually there at the time. But if I had to guess, in the town, there probably are about 30 buildings that have plaques on them that were not there at the time of the battle. And there still are buildings in the town that we know were there that don't have Civil War building plaques on them. So I really like that question, very interesting, and I know a lot of people are into that question. So make sure you tune in again next week for more questions from our Monuments Monday. And again, if you like the historical content that we put on our page, please like and subscribe our channel.